Where do NATO members stand, Ollie? Get us up to speed on where different members of NATO stand on that defence spending and that target of 5%.
Yeah, Tom, it's worth just sort of noting this moment where we got to 5%. You know, this is something that Donald Trump had sort of floated in his election campaign, his re-election campaign, talking about NATO at 5%. This was basically, I wouldn't say quite laughed at, but completely rejected as a concept, totally unrealistic, and basically, you know, something that the NATO and its many members would never sign up to. And now today, you know, a few months later, it is becoming reality. Now, we should say we know that Donald Trump is a fan of big, beautiful numbers, and for NATO, presenting him with that figure is going to go a long way, they hope, in sort of reassuring the alliance with the United States and the support of the United States. But the reality of that number is it's not quite 5%, right? About 3.5% of that is the sort of actual, you know, guns and ammo, real military spending that we sort of are accustomed to thinking about when we think about NATO targets. 1.5% of that is more to do with things that support the defense industry. So, Tom, think cybersecurity. Think about potentially the infrastructure that has to be built around countries, including, let's say, Germany. If you've got to carry tanks across Germany, you need the infrastructure that is able to do that. Those are the kinds of things that you can get to about 1.5%. The other side of this is the timeline. They're expecting to hit those targets by 2035. We should say that probably breathes a little bit of flexibility into things because, of course, Trump's second term is supposed to end at the end of 2028. And so, again, maybe that breathes a little flexibility into it. And, of course, here is still the fly in the ointment, Tom. We do not have every single member fully committed to this figure yet. We still have Spain, the outlier, Pedro Sanchez, saying that basically they can achieve all of their NATO targets with only spending 2.1%. If this whole sort of setup were to fail just due down to the Spanish, that would obviously be a massive disappointment. It would be a real catastrophe for this event where we're anticipating Trump to arrive in just a few hours' time.
Well, Ollie, what are the best and worst case scenarios then from this summit?
Yeah, I think the worst case scenario is definitely there's not universal agreement on that 5% target. Trump either does not come, right, or it comes and he's very sort of upset about that. And then basically the NATO alliance is thrown once again into disarray. I'd have to say that I suspect that that is probably a fairly low possibility. But, Tom, even in the best case scenario, let's imagine a world where everybody signs up to 5%. Everybody sort of agrees to the timeline to get there. And everybody basically agrees to buy mostly American military kit because there aren't a huge number of alternatives at this stage. What is the best case scenario for what Donald Trump says to the Europeans? Is he going to do a 180 and say, listen, we're very, very satisfied with you now. We want to pat you on the head and say, listen, we are very, we're going to be fully committed to NATO. There's nothing you can do wrong. Probably not. And, Tom, the other thing that sort of hangs over all of this is not just the sort of commitment of the United States to Article 5. There are also 84,000 American military personnel stationed all across Europe. You know, like 40,000 of them are in Germany. You have some here in the Netherlands. The real question is, over the next few months, we're expecting the U.S. to give its new military posture across the world, and they're expecting the United States to draw down many of those deterrent troops that are across Europe. We should say that Biden added to those forces by about 20,000 after the invasion of Ukraine, but the expectation is still that that is going to draw down further, and that is also the other conversation that hangs over this event here. But we should say, Tom, and I think it is worth noting that of all the sort of foreign policy goals that Donald Trump has established for himself, this is one where he's going to be able to say it has been massively successful. And when you think about the average spending of NATO members over the last decade, it's been about 1.6%. We're talking about now 5%. That is an absolutely massive change.
And, Ollie, as we continue, of course, to monitor developments in the Middle East, with the airport authority in Israel saying that they have now reopened airspace in Israel. So Israel saying that it's reopened its airspace. That is according to the airport authority. We have to, of course, think about how the Middle East and this potential ceasefire, this apparent ceasefire, of course, folds into the dynamics of the summit that's going to be taking place behind you.
Yeah. Yeah, so listen, I think there are three things here. I think that the first is that the Europeans know that their influence is very limited on the Middle East, generally speaking, on Iran, on Israel, on the United States. They say they can potentially play a sort of diplomatic role, but that is not really an engagement that they're going to be focused on. They're really focused on Russia and the NATO alliance. The second is, you know, it kind of bears on the mood that Trump arrives here with. He's going to be feeling good if the ceasefire holds, but does that embolden him to ask a little bit more from the Europeans and be a little bit more, you know, willing to throw his weight around? That is another big question. So I think that for all of the leaders that are gathered here, they're going to like the opportunity to be before Trump. And again, in the context of the Middle East situation, if the ceasefire holds, I think it could bode in sort of different directions for how this summit goes over the next 24 hours.